Welcome in everyone, and I hope you're ready for an exciting video because I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you. If you're just joining in today, we're recreating the soundtrack for Metroid Dread, and this is a big one because we're reimagining the final battle of the game. This one was a bit of a labor of love for me, but personally I'm really happy with how it all came together. And so without further ado, sit back, relax, and welcome to Arcade Redux. This is the last video chronologically in this series that we've been going through for over a year now, and the ride has been a blast for me to be a part of, and there are some new exciting things coming for the channel in the near future that I'm really excited to share with you all. But for now, I'm working on the final pieces of this soundtrack, and when I'm finished, it's going to be released digitally for your listening pleasure as well as in mod form for your gaming pleasure, and there's a few more things to clean up, but for today, let's journey to Itarash, where we come face to face with Ravenbeak, Samus's sort of father, and the final step in her escape from ZDR. Let's start by looking at the fight itself and the original score composed for this duel. There's several things going on that makes this final battle so intense as a player, especially your first time playing through the game. For one, you're gonna die many times as you learn how Ravenbeak attacks you. And as is true of many of the boss fights in this game, you're going to find yourself slowly and gradually learning and improving through the many attempts it will inevitably take to gain an understanding of how to defeat Ravenbeak. It's a high-energy, fast-paced fight and puts all of your abilities and skill to the test. In my mind, it really is the perfect culmination of everything that you've accomplished to this point. There are 3 phases, each with slightly different mechanics and beats. You may not have realized while playing, but there are actually 3 separate parts of the soundtrack to correspond with each phase. And while this is the case, each phase musically is very much just a slight deviation from the others, and in my mind they're essentially interchangeable. I like that the composers made the decision to develop the track as you work your way through each part of the fight, but one of the things that I wanted to do a little differently for my reimagined version was to give each phase a little more of its own identity. While still letting each phase feel that it's part of the same idea, I wanted there to be a greater sense of progression. One of the things that's unique about this battle, at least when you're attempting it for the first few times, is that you will find yourself playing through many repetitions of each phase until you're competent enough to move on to the next one. For example, your first time fighting Ravenbeak, you're going to be stuck in the first phase for at least a handful of times, but with each attempt, you find yourself spending less time in that phase and more time in the next. For this reason, I think there could have been a more tangible way to make the soundtrack reflect these mini accomplishments as you move from one phase to the next, and to progress the music in a way that increases the tension and excitement the further you get. Almost as if part of the reward for making it through to each new phase is unlocking a new development of the soundtrack. And these are things that are probably happening more subconsciously than anything, but I felt the original could have taken a little more advantage of this idea. From a musical standpoint, I really appreciate the overall picture this original track creates for you, the player. There's this sense of constant motion and anxiety that's perpetuated through the sharp staccato strings and piano. Besides this backdrop that makes up the skeleton of the piece, it doesn't really linger on any particular idea for more than a few measures, which helps create kind of a kaleidoscope-like sensation and helps reflect the intensity and unpredictable nature of Ravenbeak himself. I've spent a decent amount of time in this series discussing the things about the soundtrack that I personally would have done differently, and one of those things that has come up pretty frequently is the unstable harmony that permeates much of the game. For a large portion of the soundtrack, there's a bit of an off-putting pattern of chords and melodies, and for many of the areas, it never quite lands the punch for me. But in this case, I think it works extraordinarily well. And I think it's because contextually, this is the moment where all that tension and dissonance is really compatible with the gameplay and the intensity of the moment. I haven't talked much about the other boss themes in this game, but this applies to many of those tracks, including the Emmy sequences as well. In my mind, with the direction that the composers took with the soundtrack, it really applied well to certain types of moments, but just not others. And these fast-moving, adrenaline-pumping sequences are where it really shines, in my opinion. So in my reimagining, I wanted to retain these elements that are effective in the original score, but use my own voice and tools to create the context of this fight in a way that's compatible with the rest of the reimagined soundtrack that I've created. And if you pay attention to what I did, you're going to hear a few references and callbacks to other parts of the soundtrack. With this battle being the moment where the player puts all their abilities to use and is the culminating moment of their journey through ZDR, I wanted the track to reflect that by subtly including some elements from the rest of the game musically as well. So you'll hear some rhythmic, harmonic, and melodic ideas that have developed and are building towards this final test. Something you may notice is that with the exception of the ascending motif that connects each phase to each other, the harmony is very stable and the bass is very much locked into a repeating pattern. Combined with the track having a 5/8 feel, there's definitely a connective tissue to boss themes in other games in the Metroid series. You'll hear the choir and synths play around with some themes over top of that bass, most notably the Ferenia progression, which I wanted to bring back in this new context, almost as if the original time seeing the Malkin relics is coming full circle as you try to defeat them and their leader once and for all. As the piece moves into the second and third phases, there's a bit of a movement into more of what I would call a romantic style intensity, as opposed to adrenaline based. I wanted especially the third phase to feel more cinematic and really increase the magnitude of the moment from a story standpoint. So you'll hear the third phase slowly crescendo as it builds into a final reference of the motif from Hanubia that hinted towards this final clash. Overall, I think I might be most proud of this track more than any other in the series. I think a lot of that is because it took a lot of work for me to actually feel happy with it. And those are the times I think as an artist you feel the most accomplished in what you're creating. I hope you've enjoyed going through this series with me. It's been an amazing journey, and while there are a few things left to tie up, this represents the final large chapter of the Dread soundtrack. And I want to say thank you for all the love and support to this point. I'm excited to share some new exciting things for the channel coming up, but for now, I just want to say how much fun it's been going through this project with all of you. And so with all that said, here is Ravenbeak Reimagined.
Families, this is an order. This will be